kind of angle of attack there, so a little more diversification of his targets for natural order. Also, he's on 3 Gaze Cradles and 1 crop rotation rather than 4 Cradles.
Yes, and Max Tietze won the Baltimore Invitational, and Goblins is a deck that him along with his partner in crime, Jim Davis, they kind of play a lot in Legacy, hoping to try to repeat his performance here at the Legacy Open. He does have a 1-copy Goblin Sharpshooter in the main, which is going to be very effective if you can get it in this matchup. Unfortunately, it looks like he's mulliganing now, I believe possibly for the 2nd time, so it might be going to 5 cards, but it's going to be kind of an uphill battle, but either way, Max definitely has some cards that could be very good in this matchup.
Sure, if he gets Sharpshooter going, that makes up for a lot of mulligans.
Yes, he has 4 copies of Goblin Matron, which will allow him to search it up. He also has 4 copies of Gem Palm Incinerator, which can kind of slow down Tyler a little bit and deal with some of those cards like Heritage Druid and, Birchlore Rangers, cards that kind of fuel the combo for the elf deck.
Absolutely.
And it looks like Max is still shuffling here. Out of his board, he has a card like 3 copies of Pyrokinesis, which is actually very powerful in this matchup.
Absolutely.
One-sided board sweeper. So be interested to see if Max doesn't win the first game. He's not in too bad shape after board. He's got some cards for creature-based matchups like Alex.
Meanwhile, I think out of kind of looking ahead to Tyler's sideboarding, I could see something like Progenitus coming in here. He might have a hard time battling through those Pyrokineses to make his board developed enough such that the Behemoth will be lethal. So if he's afraid of not being able to kill him with a one-shot Behemoth, well, Progenitus takes care of business very quickly.
Yeah, a lot of times against heavy removal decks, the Elves players just use natural order to search up a fatty and say, okay, I'm just going to win this way. Most decks can't deal with Progenitus, particularly a deck like Goblins.
Yep.
So they do have copies of Sting Scourger to deal with like an Emrakul, but obviously not very good against Progenitus.
Yep, so I suspect that will come in for Tyler.
So it looks like Max did double mulligan, so he's at 5 cards, and Tyler's on the play with a full grip of 7.
And leading off, with Nettle Sentinel here, 2/2 for 1, and kind of one of the key parts of his engines with the Birchlore Rangers or with Heritage Druid to get that mana going.
Yeah, Nettle Sentinel was really, once Nettle Sentinel hit the scene, that's what made the Elf deck run. The ability to untap whenever he casts a green spell, along with cards like Birchlore Rangers and Heritage Druid, really sort of create this mana engine that can overwhelm a lot of decks.
One interesting thing here in Max's deck, so I'm familiar with Goblin splashing black. I haven't seen so much Goblin splashing white here for Talia. What do you think about that as a choice?
I think walking around the tables, you see some of the Goblin decks starting to splash white instead. For Thalia, it's a little more proactive threat. It gives them a little more game against a deck like Ant. Now being able to board in Thalia and Mindbreak Trap, because again, Goblins, while it can be very powerful, it is one of those fair decks that we've been talking about all weekend, and the fair decks really need to have a heavy sideboard against the combo decks out there. So I think I like the idea of boarding in Thalia and Mindbreak Trap. Again, you mentioned how a lot of players are splashing black for a card like Cabal Therapy and Thoughtseize. Those cards are great, but Thalia is a little more proactive, allows you to attack with it too, so interesting take here.
I think it's funny that we're describing Goblins now as a fair deck, which I don't necessarily disagree with you, but there were a long period of time in Extended and Legacy when turn 1 Goblin Lackey was one of the more unfair things you could actually do.
Yeah. So it looks like Tyler might have forgot to untap a Nettle Sentinel with the ability after he cast a Wirewood Symbiote.
It does look that way.
So it is a May. So
even if it's not, all triggers are now.
Yes, all the trigger rules change things, everything. But it does look like he has a Gaia's Cradle in his hand, another Wirewood Symbiote, so he's going to be able to generate a lot of mana. And looks like nothing but a Skirk Prospector on Max's side of the board, along with a Wasteland, which isn't really that great in this matchup. He will be able to deal with the Gaia's Cradle, but the Gaia's Cradle might do its work already at that point.
No, absolutely true. Interesting now, kind of looking at Max's list for any other things that stand out. He does not have any copies of the double striking Lackey. Whose name is escaping me.
War Driver, Goblin War Driver.
Yeah, there we
I think it's. Can we bring up Goblin War Driver? I believe it's the double red 1/1 first striker. I believe we're talking about. So
there's the guy I'm trying to talk about. His name though
that is
what
you're referring to.
But
right?
I'm not sure I've ever cast a Goblin outside of Limited in my career.
You don't seem like a Goblin. Yeah, so Goblin War Driver.
Oh no,
that is the Battle Cry one.
Marshall, Goblin War Marshall. We're going to try a ball here. We're going to go through Goblin War X.
Any of our Twitter followers, if you want to tweet us the answer, that is a quick trivia question for you. What is the name of the two-mana goblin that actually has double strike and has the goblin lackey ability?
Maybe I was thinking of Mogwar Marshal, which is obviously the one that makes another one. Instigator.
Goblin Instigator.
From the sidelines, Warren Instigator.
Warren Instigator.
7th time's the charm here. So anyhow, what I'm trying to say is no copies of that in Max's deck. I've seen that in a lot of Goblin lists recently.
Yeah.
As maybe not as a 4 of, but a couple copies.
Yeah, and I think Max and Jim Davis probably think that might be more of a win more card.
Sure.
Maybe it's not not necessary. So Tyler continues to attack with his relatively small army, but again, he has a Heritage Druid in his hand, along with a Wirewood Symbiote in play and another in his hand, and that Gaia's Cradle. So if he actually draws a
Regal Force,
if he draws a Natural Order, if he draws a Green Sun Zenith or a Crater Up Zenith, he could actually get those into play. So a lot of outs for Tyler to just end this game very quickly.
Behemoth probably is not going to do it quite yet, because in order to cast these, might have to tap several of his creatures to the Birchlar Ranger to generate that mana.
So he has the Heritage Druid in his hand, so he could just get a Heritage Druid into play.
Sure, that's true.
And the Nettle Sentinel will be able to untap. So I think he might get enough, because the Gaia's Cradle will tap for 5.
Interesting decision here by Tyler to trade off that Birchlar Ranger, given that he does have that Cradle in his hand. But maybe he thinks the Cradle plus the Heritage Druid is enough mana. And Max here stalled on 1 land now, losing the ability to sack the Prospector for a second red.
Yeah, if I were Tyler, I think because Max already used the Wasteland, you could play the Gaia's Cradle in your hand and just unleash both the creatures that are in your hand.
Yep.
Because then you have a lot more live draw steps, I think.
I do think I may have held back the Birchlar Ranger there, since the Vial's going to 2 anyhow, having that second mana from the Prospector ability to sacrifice itself, not that relevant.
Yeah. And Tyler might be thinking, maybe I'll hold back my creatures in case I draw a Glimpse. But again, if you have 2 copies of Wirewood Symbiote, probably not necessary. But we'll see what he plans on doing. And it looks like, yes, we're going to see at least 1 Heritage Druid. So, and Nettle Sentinel untaps this time. Ooh, Goblin Lackey. Unfortunately, there are plenty of blockers available on Tyler's side of the board. Max does have looks like a Sting Scourger, and he upticks the Aether Vial to 2. So he can actually Aether Vial that Sting Scourger to play if he chooses.
Looks like his hand Sting Scourger, Siege Gang Commander, and possibly a Pile Driver, maybe a Matron?
Yeah, it might be a Matron. So
Tyler drawing another one of his, many 1-mana elves.
So it looks like Llanowar and Nettle Sentinel coming over.
Attacking this Llanowar Elf into that Aether Vial is a little ambitious. Wow, this is very ambitious.
Is he going to be tapping that mana, or?
And they're attacking. I'm not a...
I actually am... Oh, interesting. He's going to... So he is going to bring the Sting Scourger into play.
Tyler giving that a quick read. We can do the same. We'll pull it up here on screen. With Sting Scourger, when it comes into play, it returns target creature to its owner's hand, and then it has Echo of 4 mana.
Yeah, so it's one of those few cards that Goblins has that can actually deal with an Emrakul. So if the Show and Tell deck casts Show and Tell, they put an Emrakul into play, you can put a Goblin Matron into play, search for a Sting Scourger, and then cast it on your turn to bounce the Emrakul.
So Max is probably bouncing the Symbiote here with the Sting Scourger, so that whoever he blocks actually dies. Otherwise, whichever elf was getting blocked would just get picked up by the Symbiote. So he'll actually get to pick off this Llanowar Elf now with the Sting Scourger in combat. Or maybe he'll just choose to trade with the Nettle Sentinel.
Yeah, Nettle Sentinel is pretty important. It's sort of the engine for the deck. I think Max feels like he's pretty far behind now, so let me just try to slow things down, get some of these creatures off the board, kind of hurt Tyler's mana a little bit, because again, one of those lands is Gaia's Cradle, and hopefully I'll draw a Matron so I can search for a Sharpshooter to sort of regain that advantage.
That's one huge way to turn the game back around. Also, just buy time to get that Aether Vial up to 4, so you can stop dropping your ringleaders into play, which is how you can really refill your hand quickly.
Yeah, so it looks like Max does in fact have a Matron in his hand, so we could be seeing a Matron coming into play, searching for a Sharpshooter, and the next turn, even though he only has 1 mountain, because Sharpshooter is also a 3-drop, he can Aether Vial that into play as well.
I'm not sure I would actually do this in combat. I might just take the point and let Tyler dump his hand.
I don't know. I kind of like being able to just deal with the Heritage Druid here, because again, if Tyler's not dumping his hand, he can't really do anything. He doesn't really have an answer
that is
to
true.
Goblin Sharpshooter, And with only a Gaia's Cradle in play, it's going to be pretty rough for Tyler to come out of this.
That's true. And now again, that these elf decks have moved away from having copies of the Archdruid and pump their power and toughness. They are more susceptible to cards like Sharpshooter, cards like Engineered Plague. Hard to kind of defeat those lines of attack.
Yeah, and Tyler does have a Deathrite Shaman in his hand, so he has one creature that can actually survive a ping from a Sharpshooter. However, Sharpshooter does untap whenever a creature dies, so it's going to make combat very difficult. It's going to be very difficult for Tyler to sort of overcome a Sharpshooter being in play.
Yep. Yeah, I think Max might be pulling out a win here with his 5 cards, just because of how hard it was going to be for. And here we see Tyler, okay, putting a guy into play who has 2 toughness at least.
Yeah. So the good thing here is because Max is sort of a little far behind, doesn't really have that much pressure in play. Tyler still has a chance to sort of just draw a natural order and kind of get a big creature in play. Even a behemoth would be pretty good.
I agree with that, but I like what Max just did here. He put the Sharpshooter into play and then went up to 4.
Yep.
Because he's taking towards that SCGATL commander also in his hand.
Yeah, so what he does is he put the Aether Vial's ability to uptick on the stack, activates it to put the Sharpshooter in play, and then brings it up to 4.
And now we see a Wogmore. Wow.
So this is actually really interesting here. Goblin Sharpshooter's ability is whenever a creature dies, you're allowed to untap it. So Max can actually choose to allow that don't pay the upkeep on the Marg War Marshal, so it will die. He can put the ability from Sharpshooter on the stack, target a Deathrite Shaman, then untap once the ability resolves, and then target Deathrite Shaman again, untapping it, effectively wiping Tyler's board.
I think that's what might be what we're about to see.
So it looks like, SCGATL Commander is now Aether Vialable, and that is exactly what Max is doing. He puts the Echo on the stack. He's going to target Wirewood Symbiote first so that there's no shenanigans with returning the creature to my hand. So it looks like he's going to activate Deathrite Shaman to gain some life here. Targeting a random goblin in Max's graveyard. It doesn't really matter. So Sting Scourger gets removed with Deathrite Shaman. Tyler gains 2 life. Heritage Druid gets returned with the Wirewood Symbiote. So it looks like we might have a Judge Ruling. So no, it resolves. Deathrite Shaman gets to untap. And now the Wirewood Symbiote dies. Goblin Sharpshooter untaps. Echo is still on the stack.
Yep, and now I think we're going to see him let it go like you described and kill off that Deathrite Shaman as well.
Is he going to? So it looks like Marg War Marshal does die. So the Sharpshooter trigger is still on the stack. So with it on the stack, he pings the Deathrite Shaman. Now the trigger resolves. It untaps, and he targets Deathrite Shaman again.
So he probably shouldn't have put the token into play, implying that the second trigger resolved.
Yeah.
No, it still works.
It still should work because it goes on the
yeah,
both
he
will
can
go on the
stack them
stack.
however he wants, right.
As long as he stacked them correctly, he's fine.
And he clearly stated, from his immediate actions what he was trying to do there.
So Tyler gains another 2 life. Goblin Sharpshooter untaps yet again, and now Max, after a mulligan to 5, looks to be in a pretty good position.
He does. He's definitely in the driver's seat here now.
SCGATL Commander can come into play. Tyler only has access to 2 mana because that Gaia's Cradle was really impressive a couple turns ago. Now, not so much.
He had a few turns here to draw one of his kind of heavy hitters to put this game away, and he did not do that.
Yeah, he basically had 1 turn to draw a natural order to sort of get a behemoth in play. Even though the behemoth wouldn't have been lethal, it's still a 5/5 that goblins might have a tough time dealing with.
Yep.
So again, Tyler has been drawing lands, so now he has access to 3 mana, but he's still going to need to get pretty lucky. He basically needs runner. He's going to need another land and a natural order, but he still needs a creature to get into play. And
that's pretty hard to do because the Sharpshooter's going to pick them off as each one gets announced and put on the stack. It kills the one that already hit play.
Well, the good thing is, though, he can cast the creature. As long as the creature isn't like an Elvish Visionary with some sort of come into play ability, Max won't be able to resolve if Tyler just casts natural order.
It's part of the cost of the natural order.
Yeah.
That's another kind of critical part of the timing to point out.
But once that SCGATL Commander entered play, Tyler said, all right, I've seen enough. I can't actually deal with that board state. So despite a mulligan to 5 by Max on the draw, he's able to pull that out because of the power of Goblin Sharpshooter.
Absolutely. It harkens back to Block Constructed a number of years ago.
God, that glorious onslaught block, the good old days. Goblins, Astral Slide, those fun, fair decks.
Did you play it all in that format?
I did. I did play.
Oh, wow.
Yes, it was a pretty good format for me. Really enjoyed it. So Max, things like you said, things get a little bit better for Max after board. He has 3 copies of Pyrokinesis, which are great against elves, like we just saw. Being able to wipe off those 1/1 mana producers.
Yep.
It's really tough for the elf deck to get going if it doesn't have cards like Birthright Rangers or Heritage Druid. You know, it really needs that mana. And again, Wirewood Symbiote and Kieran Rangers, they sort of are synthetic pseudo engines that keep fueling the deck and keep untapping cards and stuff. So Pyrokinesis is definitely coming in for Max.
Tyler at least has a little bit of spot removal he can bring in to improve his chances of recovering from something like this Goblin Sharpshooter. He has 2 copies of Abrupt Decay and 1 copy of Mortar Pod.
Mortar Pod, yes, a very interesting card. We don't see that very often in Legacy.
It also would not surprise me to see him swap in the Progenitus for the Kratos Behemoth. I think, as we saw here, how hard it is for Tyler, even against a bad draw of Max, to keep creatures in play over multiple turns. Behemoth kills might just be a pipe dream.
Yeah, I think you definitely want to, I think it's just going to be too hard for Craterhoof Behemoth to win in this position. Again, Tyler doesn't know that Max has 3 copies of Pyrokinesis in the sideboard, but he probably can assume that there's going to be some more removal that he's going to have to contend with.
Yep.
So why bother trying to win with the Craterhoof Behemoth when a Progenitus can get the job done against Goblins?
I agree completely.
I agree with you with the Abrupt Decay and the Mortar Part as well. It's another way to deal with a card that you just got devastated by, which is Goblin Sharpshooter. And Abrupt Decay is actually really good because it also deals with cards like Goblin Lackey and Aether Vial, which can also be problematic. Again, Lackey, Tyler has plenty of ways to block it, but you know, if you get one of those draws where you're maybe a little slow and Max actually has like a Gem Palm Incinerator or the Pyrokinesis, God forbid, and that Lackey can swing over, then things can get out of control really quickly.
That is certainly true, and also we see, you know, these copies of Aether Vial act as recurring Dark Rituals almost in this deck. So being able to blow those up can definitely hurt Max's ability to develop his board quickly.
Yeah, because allowing the Aether Vial to keep ticking up is just so important in this deck because it just has cards like Goblin Matron, which aren't very efficient if you have to cast them. But if you can Aether Vial them to play, they're actually great.
Yep.
So Max looks like he went to the bathroom. I can only assume. Otherwise, it looks like we're going to be getting a little bit of a break here while Tyler maybe gets some more time to figure out what his sideboard plan is going to be.
Well, let's see what else maybe we can talk a little more about Onslaught Block Constructed.
Oh yes.
What was your favorite deck in that format?
Astral Slide.
Astral Slide. So why don't you tell our viewers, some of them may not have been playing back then, what is Astral Slide?
Yes, well, in the year 1965, I won a Pro Tour with a deck called Astral Slide, which is a red-white control deck that abused the cycling mechanic.
Sure.
And it was a block Pro Tour, and block Pro Tours were actually really interesting back then. They've changed a lot. WotC's done a really good job of changing the block where you don't just have 2 decks. You know, for years, the block Pro Tour was always just about 2 decks. You know, there was the deck that abused whatever mechanic was for the set.
Sure.
And then there was a very heavy tribal deck. So the first block Pro Tour that I can remember that I actually attended, which is a Pro Tour in New York, not as a player, but as a just a viewer. You can't do that today. You can't view Pro Tours, but back then you could. And it was the Mercadian Mask block Pro Tour. And the 2 decks by far that were the most prominent were Rising Waters, and that sort of free spell mechanic was sort of the mechanic of the set that people were abusing, and Rebels, obviously.
Sure.
The Rebel Pro Tour.
Which is the other mechanic, which is the fetching cards out of your library.
Exactly. So Rebel theme and Rising Waters, they kept battling against each other, and what ended up winning was, what I noticed was, okay, wow, Rising Waters won, so sort of like the free card mechanic won. Next Pro Tour was obviously Pro Tour Tokyo's V. Malchowitz won that.
Sure.
And the two decks there were Rocket Shoes and the Solution.
Yep.
And Solution obviously just abused Rocket Shoes.
Sure.
Rocket Shoes was a red-green, really aggressive deck. And then after that was a Pro Tour.
And the Solution was a blue-white sort of aggro control deck that had protection from red creatures in the main deck, actually, because the Rocket Shoes, all those red creatures are so predominant.
Yeah, really a brilliant take and a brilliant deck for that tournament. Really kind of found sort of Zvi and Sam Black. I'm not surprised that they teamed together because they both sort of just are able to find these decks that really abuse certain metagames, you know? So it's not surprising that they work so well together on your team.
Sure.
But yeah, block Pro Tours were always basically dominated by just 2 decks, you know, for the longest time. And now you're starting to see a lot more decks pop up and block, and I think that's a credit to WotC and the way they design sets now. You know, there's a lot more variety. Even the last Block Pro Tour, I believe, which was Barcelona, there were a lot of decks. Obviously, Wolf or Silverheart was very popular, but there was also Miracle deck. There was also the Bant deck that you guys played, the Hexproof deck. You know, there were some decks that showed up afterwards, like Jund, that people became very popular, but they were afraid to play there.
Even in that PT, I played against a Jund Reanimator deck in that Pro Tour.
Yeah.
So that deck also existed. There's also more of a Jund controlling deck, too.
And let's not forget, there was humans. There was red-white humans, green-white humans that Channel Fireball played. So a lot more variety. And with the upcoming Pro Tour San Diego being blocked, I wouldn't be surprised if that theme continues, where there's just a lot more variety in block than there was like 8 or 7 years ago.
I think that's definitely true. I mean, my favorite of kind of the 2-deck blocks, kind of harkening on the same theme you're piggybacking here, was actually Odyssey block, where you had the Madness mechanic and then the Atog tribe battling it out for dominance.
Yeah, that was my first top 8, actually. Yes, it was the 2-deck metagame was Mono Black Control and Blue Green Madness, and Andrew Cuneo, another teammate of yours, actually built a Psychotog deck that I played, and along with the rest of CMU, and not a lot of people were expecting Psychotog because, again, it was a 2-deck format, you know? It was Mono Black and Blue Green. What is a Psychotog doing there? But, you know, that's the great thing about block, is that if you can find these little few cards here and there that really can exploit a metagame, you can do really well for yourself.
Absolutely. So now our Max returned from the bathroom. He's ready to play some Magic. Back here to the present-day Legacy format. Looks like Tyler, being on the play, is thinking about his hand.
And it looks like we have...
no. He's already kept. Max is the one mulliganing. Worked out for him last game.
Yeah, why not? So Max's average hand size in these 2 games has been around 5.5. So, but he did pretty well for himself in the first game. Let's see if he can pull out the second game.
Here, though, he doesn't have... His trump card in the Sharpshooter isn't quite as unanswerable. Tyler now having a few ways to kill it. So Max can't go as low as he did, and just know that if he finds that one card, he'll be able to win the game.
Yeah, not only that, Tyler does have access to 4 copies of Natural Order now, so he could just threaten to go turn 3 Progenitus.
Right. And that's something Max is going to find very difficult to deal with. Progenitus, which we'll pull up here on the screen, hasn't seen as much play recently in Legacy, now that we have cards like Emrakul and Grizzlebrand that have emerged. Before them, it was really the target of choice for some of these kind of decks trying to sneak a fatty into play. It has protection from everything.
Yeah, and you'd think a 10-10 with protection from everything, you know, why aren't more people playing that? Well, Emrakul and Grizzlebrand, those cards just happen to be better. So just kind of goes to show you the power level of some of the creatures that WotC's been making lately. That they could actually trump a 10-10 protection from everything. Yeah,
it's hard to believe. At the time, it was such a wow factor of that card.
Yeah, it became very, it's still, you know, popular with Hypergenesis decks. But you don't see it nearly as often as you do.
The one downside with it is that it can't actually be reanimated.
Yes. Right,
so similar to Emrakul, it has to be cheated into play. We used to see actually the Hive Mind combo deck, which is a combo deck briefly for a number of tournaments. Progenitus was its plan B. Plan A was getting Hive Mind into play, which is an enchantment, then casting a Pact to kill your opponent. But anyway, back to this match. Elves and Goblins, some good old-fashioned honest creature magic, where one is trying to cheat a 10-10 into play, and the other is trying to abuse an Aether Vial.
And Tyler has a pretty good start for this game. He's got a glimpse of nature. He has the obviously turn 1 Nettle Sentinel. Now he has a Birchlore Ranger, and it looks like he also has the Natural Order in his hand.
That's a card of Behemoth as well, though, which he left in.
Interesting.
So I wonder which other Natural Order targets he's brought in here.
Hopefully he brought in the Progenitus, but either way, he does have a copy of Abrupt Decay, so he's going to be able to deal with the Goblin Sharpshooter if ever comes in play. He could also just kill this Lackey right now, although Lackey's not really being very threatening. However, he can respond to a Gem Palm Incineration cycle, which would end up not doing any damage for the Birchlore Rangers. So let's see what Max decides to do this turn. He does have a Gem Palm Incinerator. Maybe he's thinking about just cycling that Incinerator, targeting the Birchlore Rangers, knowing how important mana is for Tyler's deck.
And he definitely would be in for a surprise if he makes that play.
I think, Tyler's probably really hoping that's what happens, because I think he doesn't have another land, so if he top decks a Heritage Druid, that should be enough for the Natural Order.
That or any land.
Yes, or any land, but then again, we don't really know.
Or Crop Rotation. No, Crop Rotation not quite doing it. He only has...
No, it does. 2, 3, 4, because the Birchlore Rangers.
Okay, I can do math.
However, again, we don't know whether or not he brought in Progenesis because we do see that Crater of Behemoth.
And Max instead deciding to just, this is interesting. Why?
So maybe he doesn't think Lackey's very important in this matchup.
I don't disagree with him there. I think this is a reasonable play in making more mana, just developing his board.
Oh, wow. So now Max can actually sacrifice the War Marshal, get a token, get another Goblin.
So we're responding to the Prospector here. We should have probably responded to the War Marshal being cast, which maybe is what happens. It's possible that he said, hold on, I wanted to respond to that. No, it looks like we missed that window. So definitely wanted to respond.
But either way, though, I don't think he has enough to
right, he only has 2 red mana.
Oh, he has 2 red mana, so now the token resolves. And there's the Sharpshooter. Interesting.
Oh, wait, he sacked, so he had 3 mana because he sacked the Prospector as well.
Yeah, he sacked all his tokens.
And we just used our Abrupt Decay. That is really unfortunate for Tyler.
It doesn't look like he has, so it looks like he has a Curing Ranger.
Time to get some glimpsing going on here.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that Max didn't just kill the Birchlight Ranger right away on his own turn. Why give Tyler that extra mana?
I'm surprised that he didn't use the Birchlight Rangers and the Nettle Sentinel to actually cast that.
And we can see here Tyler unfortunately drawing all of his expensive cards. No more creatures. That Glimpse not going to do very much.
So, yep, Sharpshooter's going to be able to pick off that Curing Ranger. He also and Max still has the Gem Palm Incinerator in his hand,
which he can use to kill off one of the. So actually, what he probably wants to do here is just ping. Sure, he kills that for free, untaps. Now he can ping one Sentinel, Gem Palm the other, and then ping the first to wipe the board.
And the question is, does Max want to take that line, hoping that, fearing that maybe Tyler draws a Gaia's Cradle and still casts his Natural Order?
Sure.
I think it's a reasonable play here. Max probably knows about Natural Order, wants to make sure that a Gaia's Cradle isn't a way for Tyler to be able to cast it.
Yep.
So does that. Trigger can go on the stack. He can ping the other Nettle Sentinel, and then Goblin Sharpshooter will untap and he'll be able to deal with both of them this turn. So that's exactly what happens. And draws a card for the cycle, and the 1/1 Goblin token comes over to attack. So Tyler's plan doesn't really work out for him. Those Crater of Behemoth and 2 Natural Orders are just stuck in his hand now. He only has 2 mana. Max is stuck on. Oh, now Max has a Rashad Import as well.
Yep.
Put further pressure on Tyler's mana.
I mean, unfortunate for Tyler just on the timing on that Prospector, because Max didn't have a 3rd land for 2 more turns.
Yes.
So that he would have had, we can see he actually would not have gotten there. Tyler has not drawn what he needs to have cast that Natural Order, but he came pretty close.
Yeah, if Tyler probably just needs to cast Abrupt Decay on the Skirk Prospector, if you're going to do it at all.
Right.
The problem is, though, why would you really do that, though?
But then why would you do it once he starts sacking things?
No, but my point is, if you're going to, why do it at all? Because you brought in the Abrupt Decay to deal with Goblin Sharpshooter.
I'm fine with that play, too. Yeah, I'm fine with not casting it.
I feel like if you're going to cast it, clearly you have to cast it in response to the War Marshal.
Yep.
But I agree with you. I don't think they should have cast it at all.
I mean, it's easy to get those kind of little timing things wrong, and in the moment to panic a little bit, and realize, oh, I don't know what Max is doing. He's making all this mana.
Yeah.
I want this to stop. And Max does only have one Sharpshooter, so it's hard for him to really punish you for making that play.
But Tyler doesn't know how many Sharpshooters he has. Max, this is a after sideboard game. Max might have more in his sideboard. Tyler really doesn't know that. So I think if you're going to bring in a removal, you have to sort of understand, what am I using this removal on?
That I definitely agree with. You need to have a very clear plan and kind of try to stick with it.
Okay, so let's see if Tyler can pull out of this one. Max doesn't have a huge amount of pressure on him, although Rashad Import is pressuring his mana. Tyler just has another Glimpse of Nature, and he has a Curing Ranger now, so he can maybe draw at least 1 card, try to get to a 4th mana.
I think it's to hold that 1 mana elf, though. It's just too important for the Natural Order turn.
Yeah.
I think his best bet here is to say go, be patient, which is frustrating, certainly. But he's going to go a different direction.
Looks like he might be trying to go for it here. And I think I'm fine with this play. I think he just wants to sort of get a little action going.
But he's cycling 2 cards, one of which is one of the cards that he needs to have in the end. to draw one.
But I think he has a lot of one drops. I think he might be okay with it. I think he wants to just make his land drops. You know, he's trying to hit a land here. I don't fault him for this because you can't just hope that you're going to draw your way out of this. So at least if he draws a land here.
But this doesn't actually end up helping him, right? He still needs the same 3 cards to get drawn.
But at least he'll make his land drops because Rashad Import is still pressuring his mana. So he might be a little too far off if he just doesn't get the... Okay, so there's a land for the turn. So now, again, he needs land, one mana
drop.
elf.
Right,
but
versus land.
Yeah, well... yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
so,
I'm saying I think better is waiting a turn and then maybe if you draw another elf,
but I think you
can glimpse and cast 2.
But I think his odds are better for land, 1 mana elf than land. Because he has more 1 mana elves in his deck than lands at that point, correct? Birchler Rangers, Llanowar Elves, Carrion Dryad, even his deck is all 1-drops basically, and he only has like 17 lands in his deck. So I think he actually has more 1-drops. So I think land 1-drop is actually more likely than land. So now Max is a ringleader. However, so we do have 4 mana. Do we have a 5th land?
He only have either the 5th land or the...
Because he doesn't have the 1-drop.
Right. And the nice part about waiting is he also gets the chance to then glimpse into multiple
1-drops.
Right. Which is why I think I agree with you that it's pretty close between the two. Let's not put that one into play. No, that's not the one we want. Wait, if he drew a land, it actually works.
Well, he would have to play the land first, though.
No. It's summoning sick, and he forgot that.
That's the thing. You can actually tap it for mana. So
that
a little too hasty there.
Yep.
He does have Nettle Sentinel, though. Unfortunately, he will be losing it. There's a Gem Palm Incinerator, so...
And a Wasteland, yeah. That's going to, unfortunately, put the final nail in the coffin here.
Yeah, so Wasteland, your Savannah, kill your Nettle Sentinel, tap your Bayou on your upkeep. Yeah, it looks like Tyler's just going to be too far behind, not going to be able to pull this one out. Natural Order, a good plan, but not very good if you can't actually get to 4 mana in time.
Yep, absolutely true.
So it looks like that's what we're going to see here. Yep, and Tyler extends the hand and packs it up. So, Max Tietze, despite having to mulligan both games, manages to pull out. And so you kind of see here how good the Goblins-Elves matchup is on the Goblin side.
Absolutely. I think they do have a lot of the trumps in this matchup between the Pyrokinesis and then the Sharpshooter. Let's take a quick update here on standings as we've joined this tournament in round 8 of 9. We have going to this